From the darkness we strike, fast and lethal, and by the time our foes can react, darkness there and nothing more. This is a Raven Guard saying, hello, and welcome back to the Wisdom Warhammer channel. In today's video, I'll be going over the history and structure of the Raven Guard Legion. I'll be going over their time during the Great Crusade before Corax was found, and then their time during the Great Crusade after Corax was found. Then I will go over their time during the Horus Heresy, and at the end I will go over the 19th Legion structure. Like in my previous videos, I do not own the artwork in the video, and all things Warhammer are owned by Games Workshop and Black Library. So, with the intro out of the way, let's get the video started, shall we? Now, I have to mention that most of the Space Marine legions were like a hammer or a meat cleaver that butchered their way to the completion of a campaign or battle. It would strike fast, hard, and loud just like any other military force. But the 19th Legion was the surgical knife of the legions and was used when the Imperium needed something precise for delicate operations. The first recruits came from the eastern lands of Holy Terra, but more specifically the Xeric tribes, as they had held off the massive armies of the Ascendic bloc for years. The Emperor admired the skills of the Xeric people, and he would negotiate with them to bring their firstborn sons to his armies, and they did. From this, the 19th Legion would be born, and the Legion were trained and supplied and built a culture of their homeland within the Legion. When they were used in the final years of the unification wars of Terra, they would be used in infiltration, recon, and assassination missions. They used tactics similar to the 8th Legion, but they were better warriors, and one of their beginning campaigns was against the tyrant Caligan of Urish and his armies. The Raven Guard used small kill teams that stalked the warlords and Caligan himself, and then with one surgical strike they slaughtered the leadership of Urish and then herded the defeated army of Urish into a massive prison camp. It may seem like the Legion warriors who fought in this war seemed to be fine, but that is wrong. A majority of the Raven Guard veterans who fought in the war of Urish experienced horrifying psychic weapons that were unleashed by Caligan and were hit with a dark shadow. These veterans would do suicidal charges in battle, and from this the Raven Guard created the Moritat. The Moritat were the Raven Guard Marines that were suicidal, and they showed no regard for combat doctrine and discipline. As time went on, they would serve as shock troops and or solo assassins. After the legions would leave Terra and fight in the Sol system, the Raven Guard would be tasked with killing all Xenos upon the Jovian range, more specifically the moon Lysynthia. Now, a decent number of legionaries who fought in the Battle of Lysynthia were similar to the veterans of the conquest of Urish, and a lot of them would be put into the Moritat. The Raven Guard who would fight against the Xenos overlords of the human populace on Lysynthia, and it was so brutal that all of the humans of the colonies on the moon were killed after the Xenos launched dark weapons upon the 19th and the other humans. Sometime after this battle, a lot of the 19th Legion veterans of this battle were called back to the Gene Forges for an unknown reason and never to be seen again. The remaining veterans that fought in that battle wore a mark called the Ancient Jovian Rune, and after some time the only ones to wear this mark were the Dreadnoughts and Shade Captain Voltarius, who was one of the commanders of this battle. After the conquest of the Sol system, the Raven Guard would be a separate wing of the Luna Wolves Legion and were under the command of Horus due to their small numbers. The Raven Guard served alongside the Luna Wolves as assassins and scouts and would work well with the 16th Legion's brutal and fast assaults. When the 16th Legion launched attacks and pushed against the foes, the 19th Legion would be in the shadows and would violently slaughter all in their way. After decades and possibly a century of the Great Crusade, some people of the Imperial military and some of the other legions observed that Horus looked at the 19th as his own legion. Eventually, Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the 19th Legion, was found upon the Moon of Deliverance after he liberated the moon from the cruel tech guilds of Kievar. When Corax was given command of his legion after the surrender of the tech guilds, he would immediately implement his way of warfare within the legion. He would see the records and reports of how the Terran-born Raven Guard fought and saw the culture of the Xeric tribes within the legion and got rid of it. He restructured the legion command and put a lot of them in lower ranks, but still made them help train the Marines from Deliverance. The worst of the Terran-born Raven Guard, including Shade Lord Arrakis Fall, who led the 19th for decades, would be banished alongside the more ruthless of the Terran-born legionaries. These Raven Guard, led by Arrakis Fall, would be exiled into the darkest parts of the Void to eliminate the threats located within this dark place. After the reforging of the Raven Guard, Corvus Corax made them into the Liberators and would make them more effective in precise military attacks and sabotages. Worlds that the Imperium thought impossible to take over were conquered with the new and improved tactics of the Raven Guard, and War Master Horus would still use the 19th Legion in these kinds of operations. But the two Primarchs would not see eye to eye on a lot of things, and would almost come to blows during the Battle of Gate 42. Sometime after the Olenor Crusade and the coronation of War Master Horus, the Raven Guard was called to the edge of the Ghoul Stars. At the call of the War Master, 4 legions arrived, and they were the Iron Warriors, Space Wolves, Raven Guard, and Sons of Horus, all legions led by their Primarch. The main area of operations was in the Akhanagum Sothis cluster that was under Imperial control since the early years of the Great Crusade. When the cluster rebelled, it was revealed that a Xenos parasite had taken over the people in the cluster, and the legions sent in would conquer the other worlds of the cluster within a few weeks. But the legions would be stuck at a place called Gate 42, and the Primarchs of the 4 legions then convened to discuss strategy. Horus ordered the 19th Legion to assault the gate directly, and Corax did not agree, but he did suggest that he could use his legion to lure the enemy from behind the gate, and then the other legions could charge in and slaughter the enemy. Perturabo called the Raven Lord a coward, and the Primarch of the 19th was about to hit the Primarch of the 4th Legion, but with the intervention of Leman Russ, it was prevented. Horus did tell the Lord of Iron off, and still ordered the 19th Legion to do a large-scale assault on the gate due to the time restriction. Corax agreed, but he would throw the Terran-born Raven Guard legionaries into the fray because they would accept the task with excitement because they were able to fight violently just like their Xeric forefathers. The battle went horribly wrong for the 19th Legion Terran Marines, and a massive portion of the Legion force was slaughtered, but Gate 42 was taken over. Corax was angry at the War Master about wasting the lives of his sons, but this was a blessing in disguise because a lot of the Terran-born legionaries were in the warrior lodges. This means that these Raven Guard warriors were traitors, and it prevented a civil war within the 19th Legion during the Horus Heresy. But for the remainder of the Great Crusade, the Raven Guard would just stick to the shadows and kill anything that threatened the Imperium. Now, I will be going over their notable campaigns during the Great Crusade. I will start with the Battle of Hell's Anvil, which was way before the Legion reunited with the Raven Lord, and it was when they were still attached to the 16th Legion. They were ordered by Horus to bring a world into Imperial control, and this world was called Barentum, and there was a fortress that the 19th Legion was sent to take over, and it was called Hell's Anvil, and it required 3 full chapters of the Raven Guard. The siege lasted 5 years before a strike cruiser of the 19th arrived in orbit and began to do bombardments, with Shade Lord Arrakis Fall leading the strike force. He would use kill teams of the Raven Guard headhunters. fall ordered 3 regiments of the Thorosian Voltigeurs in defensive lines, and they would take heavy losses and requested aid from the Legion force, but they refused. Only until the defenders of Hell's Anvil left the fortress, a massive portion of the Legion force attacked the flank of the defenders, while the shadow squads of the Ashen Claws chapter went into the deepest parts of the forest. Shade Captain narrates Kieran of the Ashen Claws and his force of Ravenguard Shadow Warriors would find the Overseers. These Overseers were the rulers of the planet and lurked in the Hell's Anvil for thousands of years and were now hulking creatures. Captain Kreen and his bodyguards held the Overseers at bay while the other squads of the 19th Legion placed charges and would eventually blow up Hell's Anvil fortress. Now, this next battle was shown in the Corvus Corax Primarch book, and it was labeled the Caranian Retribution, and it was against a massive human empire called the Carania. This empire had thousands of void cities that were called moons, and the rulers were cruel, and when Corax was ordered to liberate the people of Carania, he agreed. The Ravenlord and 30,000 Ravenguard Marines arrived and began to do hit-and-run attacks on these void cities, and a lot of them would surrender, but one would not. On the void city of Zenith 312, the ruler of this place launched chemical weapons that infected his own people into hordes of mindless berserkers. Corax and his warriors were held back and lost some legionaries, but the Imperial troops in Ravenguard and their father were able to escape Zenith 312. Corax ordered his force to kill any resistance while their father and a more attached strike force personally hunted the ruler of Zenith 312, and then, when he was found, he then was trapped on his ship and thrown into a nearby sun while he screamed for mercy from the Ravenlord. Now, this next battle was a small one, but this battle would lead a very important Ravenguard Marine to Mars, and in return he would play a pivotal role in the Schism of Mars. Upon the world of Fraternus Maximus, a small force of Ravenguard, led by Commander Alcanor, who would lead the force into the destruction of a Xenos infestation, and they were called the Begshag. In one of the Begshag hives, a joint force of Night Lords and Ravenguard force, led by Sergeant Dravian Clyde, went into the depths, and they were successful in destroying a major hive. But sadly, Draven lost an arm and both of his legs and would crawl for days with his only arm to the Imperial lines. The Night Lords found him and gave him the name the Carrion, and the Ravenguard Shadow Warrior went under replacement surgery. After he recovered, he was transported to the Red Planet and would become a Tech Marine, and be the one who would play an important role in the Schism of Mars during the Horus Heresy. The Compliance of Indrasul was a campaign in which Corax first led his legion, and he would encounter the fierce and brutal nature of the Zarek-born legionaries of the 19th. Indrasul was a planet that was a relic of the Dark Age of technology, and it was a wasteland, and there was an odd structure in the hemisphere, and when the fleet scanned it, the Ravenlord and his commanders were shocked. They saw that the humans of the planet were enslaved by a Xenos race that were identified as the Crave, and with a suggestion from the Terran-born Raven Guard, who suggested that they use nerve-phage gas to kill everything and move on, because they did not see the point in using mass infantry attacks. Instead, Corax chose a force of 2,000 legionaries from the scout infiltration companies of the Legion and began a stealth mission using modified Shadowhawk and Darkwing gunships. The Ravenlord and his strike force landed and made their way through the weird structure and began to encounter the humans more closely, and they were horrified. The people were malformed and wretched and were similar to cattle, and the Crave were the herders, and when the 19th Legion used the tactics of guerrilla warfare, they were effective. When they reached the main Crave hosts, who were asleep, but they were awoken, and the Raven Guard retreated and were pinned down and started to be picked off. Thankfully, a massive reinforcement force of Terminators of the Raven Guard teleported, and they were able to kill all Xenos ending the compliance of Indrasul. The people of Indrasul did become servitors due to what happened to them, and the Raven Lord seeing them as corrupted in mind and body. Now, this next name is pretty familiar and is the Isfahan Compliance, and this was on Isfahan 3 and it was 15 years before the drop site massacre happened. Corvus Corax led the 27th Expeditionary Fleet and 80,000 Raven Guard legionaries, and they would begin their shadow war against the native Isfahanians in a coven of war-singer witches. The enemy would give the Legion and their fathers some resistance throughout the system, but the prisoners of war would be brought to their knees in front of the Primarch and his Legion alongside their contingents of Therian cohorts, in which would complete this compliance action. Now, going into the Raven Guard's time during the Horus Heresy, I will start with the Drop Site Massacre, and this was not fun for the Raven Guard Legion, as well as the other Loyalist legions. The Raven Guard was the smallest out of the three with around 80,000 legionaries, and the Raven Guard would fight a big force of the Word Bearers, including Lorgar and then the Night Lords for some time. The scattered Raven Guard would eventually retreat battered and broken, and their father was injured, and thanks to the actions of the Raven Guard in orbit, they were saved. Corax and the Raven Guard survivors that were with him went with him to Terra to warn the Emperor and ask for help in rebuilding the Legion. There were other groups of 19 Legion survivors mixed into other survivors of the 10th and 18th Legions, and they would be named the Shattered Legions. Corax and his force of Raven Guard went to Terra and gained a bunch of Gene Seed knowledge from the Gene Vaults and left for Deliverance. They would rebuild the Legion, but they would have to deal with an Alpha Legion cell that corrupted the pure Gene Seed of the Raven Guard. From this action, the newly pure Raven Guard Marines were mutated into a force of mutated beasts, and they were called the Raptors, and were eventually locked in cells. The Alpha Legion infiltrators and the tech guilds of Kievar launched an attack against the Raven Lord and his force of Raven Guard and a small contingent of Custodes. Seeing the desperation, Corax then unleashed the Raptors due to the Loyalists losing, and the Raptors then ripped the traitors apart and fought alongside the other Raven Guard. The Alpha Legion infiltrators were confronted by one of the Nev brothers, more specifically Agapito Nev, who threatened to use a nuclear bomb if the traitors moved while pointing a heavy weapon at them. Seeing that they lost, the Alpha Legion infiltrators swallowed poison pills that were able to kill them. Shortly after the Battle of Deliverance, Corax and his legion began to strike out and attack the traitor supply line and assist the Therian cohorts and other loyalist worlds. After some time of guerrilla war, the Ravenlord and a majority of the Raven Guard went to the planet of Yret, where the battered Space Wolf Legion was. This was right after Leman Russ and his legion attempted to kill the War Master and failed, causing a lot of Space Wolf deaths, and the wounding of the Wolf King. During this battle, the Raven Guard used more Diathane and Dark Fury squads to hit the traitors while the Space Wolves regrouped and came back to assist the 19th Legion. Sadly, this didn't last long because they would be pushed back, which caused extreme losses for the Space Wolves. Seeing the situation, Corax told the acting commander Bjorn the Fell-Handed to retreat with his legion and split up to throw the traitors off. The Raven Guard and their Primarch returned to Deliverance, and from this they waited alongside the Space Wolves and the Wolf King, who was recovering from his duel with Horus. Eventually, the Lion and his fleet of Dark Angels arrived at the homeworld of the 19th Legion, and the three brothers would talk, and the Lion would begin a crusade of vengeance against the traitor Primarch's homeworlds. Leman would gladly join the line in this crusade, but Corax refused, but he would send a small force of Raven Guard alongside the 1st and 6th Legions to act as scouts, infiltrators, and assassins who would spare an entire world in the path of the vengeful Primarchs. They would work with the two legions during the planetary combat operations. For example, they would be used in the Siege of Barbarous against the Death Guard. Now, in another part of the galaxy, the Raven Guard survivors of the Drop Site Massacre would join in the Shattered Legion's warbands, and the more notable one was the warband that was aboard the Sisypheum. Now, the only Raven Guard legionary that we know was on this ship and played a very important role was named Nikona Sherokin. Now, this Space Marine deserves his own video, but to summarize, he was considered one of the deadliest Raven Guard warriors ever. I personally think that he was a mini Korax, and he was able to play an important role in many battles that the warband of the Sisypheum fought in. He killed Lucius the Eternal in a duel, and he was the first Space Marine to shoot a Primarch with a sniper rifle and survive. And he was a master of Wraith Slipping, which is a sort of power that the Raven Guard could do in battle. But for years, the Raven Guard of the Sisypheum waged a similar war against the traitors for the entire Horus Heresy. So that pretty much sums up what the Raven Guard did for the Horus Heresy, and one thing I mentioned is that they were pretty small during the Great Crusade, and after the Drop Site Massacre they were almost extinct. You may think that they were not effective in the Horus Heresy, but they were doing what they do best in the shadows. Now going into the notable engagements of the Raven Guard during the Horus Heresy, I will start with the Battle of the Raven Delve. Now, the Raven Delve was a 19th Legion lab that was paramount in the rush creation of the Raven Guard legionaries during the Horus Heresy. The Battle of the Raven Delve began when the Alpha Legion Marines broke their cover and began to kill the Raven Guard legionaries and apothecaries within the lab. They would corrupt the gene seed and then make their way to extraction, but the Raven Guard found out what happened and began to pick off the 20th Legion operatives. While this happened in another part of the planet, the tech guilds began to attack the Raven Guard because they wanted to go back to the tyrant ways of before Korax came to the moon of Kiovar. Now, when the Legion realized this, they would coordinate a counterattack with Aetherian cohorts against the forces of the tech guilds. After some time, the Alpha Legion infiltrators were killed and the tech guilds were defeated, and the Raven Guard began to plan their next attack. Their next attack was the Raid of Crucix, which was a planet that had a Ward Barrett's listening post, and this place was a perfect place to test out the pure-bearing Raven Guard legionaries. The traitors were slaughtered to a man, and from this, the test was a success. Shortly after this, a force of Raven Guard and Aetherian cohort would attack the nearby Emperor's Children fortress called the Perfect Fortress. Now, this battle would be an arduous task and cost a lot of Aetherian lives, but the Emperor's Children were lured out and the Raven Guard came out of the shadows. The Perfect Fortress fell within a day and the Emperor's Children were humbled, which resulted in all of them dying, including their mortal servants. Now, another raid that the Raven Guard conducted was against the Dark Mechanicus shipyards called Capula 5642A, which was built in an asteroid belt. This place was very important for the Sons of Horus, and the Raven Guard saw this place as a perfect target. Capula 5642A was pumping out void ships for the traitor legions, and with tens of thousands of slaves, they would pump out a lot of ships over the course of the Horus Heresy. So, a single Raven Guard strike cruiser called the Avenger launched a squadron of Storm Birds, Thunderhawks, and Whisper Cutters that dropped Raven Guard legionaries off. The 19th Legion would strike at the heart of the shipyard and cripple the orbital defenses, which would distract the defenders while the Avenger moved in for the true attack. The traitor commander realized what was going on and would focus on attacking the strike cruiser, but he was too late. The Avenger launched a massive salvo of torpedoes at the shipyard, which would impacted while the Raven Guard kill teams were extracting, and all of this happened within a few minutes. From this raid, the traitors were dealt a terrible blow because they lost an important shipyard for their fleet. But going into the Raven Guard Legion structure, it was very similar to the other legions, but they definitely had specific units within the 19th Legion, but I will go over the Legion hierarchy. We have the Primarch Corvus Corax at the top, and under him are the Shadow Wardens, who were the personal guard of the Primarch. They did serve as his advisors as well, and were very skilled warriors that were with Corax during his time on Kievar, and under him are the Shadow Captains, who are the company commanders who lead the Shadow Warriors of the 19th. All Ravengard warriors were masters of stealth and assassination, and they would use jump packs in open ground, and in close quarters they would move fast and strike hard, and use the shadows to their advantage. Now, the specialist units of the Raven Guard were just even more sneaky Raven Guard, and the first unit I will talk about were trained by Corax himself. They were called the Mordiathane, which translates to Shadow Masters, and they were the masters of Wraith Slipping, which means that they become invincible. These squads of elite infiltrators would be used for more clandestine operations and would play a vital role in battles during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. One example was the Battle of Urit, in which I mentioned in the Horus Heresy section of the video, where they would strike traitor forces and commanders around the battlefield. Now, it is not mentioned, but Nikona Shirokin was possibly a part of this special ops unit in the 19th Legion, but I think he was more of a solo operative. After the drop site massacre, the Mordiathane had very low numbers, but they would still be used in stealth and assassination missions during the Heresy, similar to what they did during the Great Crusade, but in very low numbers. The Dark Fury assault squads were the elite shock troops of the 19th Legion and wore specialized war gear, including modified jump packs. First, they would stalk their target, and then they would strike loud and fast before the enemy could react, and would use the Darkwing modified Stormbird and the Whisper Cutter stealth ship. Now, the final specialist unit was a very common unit within the Legion, and that was composed of normal Raven Guard warriors. They were called the Moritat, and this unit was created sometime after the conquest of Urish and the Battle of the Jovian Range. This unit of Raven Guard had Raven Guard warriors who bore the Sable brand, which means that if a Raven Guard legionary had this, it would be extremely cold and depressed and would be numb to emotions. They would be placed in squads that would be used in suicide missions, and they would mostly do assassination missions that other Raven Guard would not want to do. During an assault, they would charge into combat and not care if they would die. Sometimes these warriors would eventually get out of this Sable brand, but it would be very rare sometimes. After Gilman fought these warriors in the simulations, he would adapt this kind of unit within his legion, and it would eventually create units like this across the other legions. The armored companies of the Raven Guard were nothing special, but they were effective, and when the drop site massacre happened, they would be gunned down, but would cover the retreat of their brothers. After the Raven Guard survivors of Istvan, the armored companies would be mostly dismantled and disbanded due to the small number of legionaries, and they would just become a regular unit. The wing force of the Raven Guard had a wide variety of stealth aircraft, for example, the Whisper Cutter, which was a small dropship used by the Dark Fury, Mordiathane, and Moritat strike forces. They did use modified Fire Raptors, Thunderhawks, and Stormbirds, and when the Dropside Massacre happened, the bulk of the wing corps of the 19th Legion were destroyed by the heavy artillery of the Iron Warriors. But thanks to the leadership of Raven Guard Commander Brain Nev, the Legion's Air Force was still around during the Horus Heresy and helped recover Loyalist survivors upon Istvan. The Raven Guard's size was 80,000 during the Great Crusade and was reduced to a few thousand after the Dropsite Massacre. They did have chapters within the Legion, for example, the Storm Crows, Pale Nomads, and the Ashen Claws, which were a chapter of Raven Guard that turned renegade during the Heresy and are still around to the current timeline. The Raven Guard fleet of void ships was not known, but I assume that they had a decent amount of medium-sized warships and small strike cruisers. They did have the Gloriana-class battleship, which was called the Shadow of the Emperor, but it was destroyed by Callus Typhon's ship called the Terminus S during the job site massacre. But to summarize, the Raven Guard were the special ops kind of assassination teams of the legions, and they were used for precise military actions. And their legions size was pretty small, but they were still effective. Now we have gotten to the end of the video on the history and structure of the 19th Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, hit the like button and share with someone who would like this content. If you are new and would like to see more content, hit the subscribe button and bell to be notified for when a new video comes out. Now, I hope you have a good day, and I will see you in the next video, which will be on the history and structure of the Alpha Legion, and it will be the last video on the history and structure of the Legions. With that being said, have a good one, and this is Wisdom Warhammer, signing off.